At 3:47 a.m., the control tower at Edwards Air Force Base emitted a long, crackling hiss and then went silent like the strangled last breath of a nightmare in blinding white snow. On the main screen, the final signal from SEAL Team Bravo flickered like a bloodstain pulsing across the topographic map of Central California. They had been out of contact for over 10 hours, trapped in a valley buried beneath landslides after a magnitude 7.4 earthquake. And now, a Category 5 blizzard was rolling down from the north, sealing off every route of approach by land and by air. Inside the underground operations room, the air was thick and heavy, like burning oil. Screens streamed constant feeds of weather data, satellite images, and navigation parameters, but all pointed to the same reality. 12 men were trapped at a location that officially did not exist. No runway, no way out, no time, and, worst of all, no plan for retreat. In the shadowed corner of the room, Major Mara Wraith Walker leaned against the wall, her flight suit smeared with frost and oil stains, unchanged after 16 hours on duty. She said nothing, but her presence alone was enough to snuff out conversation. Pilots who had flown through Fallujah and Helmand avoided her eyes as though dodging memories because 3 years earlier she had lost a Hercules over Mosul on a mission no one believed anyone could survive. And she had, but 4 others had not. She had been cleared of fault. But in the Air Force, absolution did not mean trust. Colonel Emerson's voice cut the air, cold as wind threading through a canyon. We need someone who can land on collapsing ground inside a blizzard. With zero visibility, the weather will deteriorate quickly. The mission window is only 90 minutes. The meteorology report slashed through what little hope remained. Winds at 85 kilometers per hour, no usable GPS, and a landing strip reduced to less than 300 meters of gravel and ice. Only one aircraft could carry enough medical gear and ammunition, the C-130 Hercules, and no one dared take it in. All eyes dropped to their boots, as though the answers lay there. Veterans decorated with the Distinguished Flying Cross now sat in silence. Not for lack of courage, but because they knew the numbers had betrayed them. No equation said a 60-ton aircraft could take off from that place. And then footsteps, not hurried, not dramatic, but with the weight of a hammer striking the last door of hope. Major Wraith stepped up to the mission board, her calloused hands brushing over the blinking coordinates as if tracing a flight path fate itself had carved for her. The worn patch on her left shoulder, stitched with the figure of a ghost gliding through storm, glimmered under the dim light. "She's doing it again," someone whispered. She lifted her head. Her voice was not loud, but it froze every breath in the room. "I will fly." For a fleeting moment, whispers spread, not rumors anymore, but prayers. And in Colonel Emerson's eyes, for the first time in 3 years, Wraith saw what she thought she had lost forever: trust. Not because she was forgiven, but because, in the moment of absolute desperation, people placed their last hope in the very person they once turned away from. Outside, the blizzard began to howl across the Sierra, like the wail of a soul imprisoned. And somewhere among those peaks, 12 SEALs waited for what no one dared believe in: a miracle shaped like a Hercules, flown by a ghost named Walker. All right, before you take your seat, take a few seconds to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly resonate with what I'm sharing, and leave a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all around the world. Major Mara Walker never called herself Wraith. That nickname, like many parts of her life, had been given by others and left behind her like scars that would never heal. At Edwards Air Force Base, where everyone knew each other's names but few truly understood one another, Mara was a quiet silence. No one disputed her skill. The technical evaluation boards consistently ranked her at the top of the squadron. But that silence, along with her unwavering, unflinching gaze, wrapped her in a fog of suspicion too vague to name. To many, she was not merely a pilot. She was an uncomfortable reminder of the fragile boundary between glory and failure, between the celebrated and the forgotten. After the incident in Mosul, the emergency landing in a besieged zone that left 4 servicemen dead and a C-130 destroyed, she was not convicted. The investigative board declared her decision reasonable under extraordinary circumstances. Yet that word reasonable carried a bitter aftertaste. Not wrong, but not heroic either. They reassigned her from tactical units to logistics and transport missions, safer, as a polite way of saying, keep her out of the spotlight. The whispers followed her across every base, that she was reckless, emotionally unsteady, prone to putting instinct above procedure. Some were blunt. She should have left the skies long ago. And she knew it. She felt the quick glances when she entered the mess hall. Conversations cut short. Forced nods. Laughter that never included her. Mara blamed no one. She herself had once harbored doubts like that about others until she became the one seen through such eyes. But there was one thing she did not do. She did not justify. She did not retell. She did not defend herself. She lived with it, the way one learns to live with the mountain cold, not by complaining, but by learning to wear another layer. Her small room in the officers' quarters mirrored her own self. Tidy, bare, without embellishment. One wall bore the emblems of past campaigns not for display, but as markers of a journey no one but she needed to remember. On her desk sat an old metal box, inside it a few black and white photos, a patch of fabric from her first pilot's seat, and an unsent letter written to her late father, the man who taught her to fly before teaching her to forgive herself. Mornings at Edwards always began with familiar sounds. The hum of transport aircraft taking off, the blare of training orders over loudspeakers, the rhythm of boots striking cold concrete. But for Mara, each day began with inspecting the C-130 she was assigned to Desert Phantom 5. No one tended an aircraft like she did. It wasn't just technical care. It was attachment. She knew it as though it were part of her body. Every faint sound, every vibration, no matter how small, she recorded in memory. A logistics officer once joked, "I think the Phantom understands you better than people do." She only smiled a smile so faint no one knew whether it meant agreement or mockery. In training sessions with younger pilots, she was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Yet few sought her counsel, simply because most believed she was too mysterious, not approachable, perhaps even not trustworthy. But there was one thing that everyone, even the coldest among them, acknowledged. When things moved beyond theory, when the weather turned and data became useless, they wanted her in the cockpit. They called it the Mosul incident. The seasoned soldiers avoided mentioning it during meetings. The younger officers who heard the story often looked at Mara with eyes half doubtful, half fearful. And to Mara herself, Mosul was not a memory, it was a wound that never stopped aching, one that never healed. It had been an ordinary resupply mission, at least on paper. Deliver medicine, equipment, and rations to a joint U.S.-Iraqi unit stationed on the northern edge of the city. No signs of danger. Reconnaissance data showed clear skies, safe ground, stable communications. But everything collapsed in just 4 minutes. As the Hercules began its descent, a surface-to-air missile appeared out of nowhere. The warning system failed to detect it in time. The aircraft shuddered as if torn from the sky. One engine exploded, fire bursting beneath the right wing. Inside the cabin, screams, alarms, and the acrid stench of burning plastic fused into a collective panic. In an instant, instinct and experience replaced procedure. Mara pulled the yoke, checked the hydraulics, and fought to keep the plane balanced with the 3 remaining engines. She did not panic. She did not scream. Instead, she whispered each step to the crew through the intercom, her voice unnervingly calm, as if guiding a simulation drill. When she realized returning to base was impossible, she chose to attempt an emergency landing on an abandoned field outside Mosul, once used as a makeshift airstrip during the Gulf War. No one remembered it. But she did. A worn map she had once studied during training. A faint annotation scrawled in the margin. The aircraft struck the ground in chaos of metal, fire, and dust. A wing snapped. The main landing gear was torn away. The fuselage spun 3 times before collapsing into a violent silence. 32 survived. 4 did not, 2 mortally wounded, 2 trapped in the aft section when the fire ignited a second time. Mara did not leave the plane until the last person was out. Her shoulder broken, her arm bleeding, she still carried a soldier with a shattered pelvis on her back out of the wreck. When rescue teams arrived, she was slumped by the roadside, gasping in short breaths, her eyes wide open as if still fixed on the burning wing. Then came the hospital. Then the investigation. Survivors all testified, without Mara's decisions and control, the entire crew would have perished. But the final report used a chilling phrase, high risk, due to actions outside standard procedure. An anonymous officer on the board even wrote, Major Walker appears to act based on instinct rather than a structured decision-making process. While effective in this specific case, such behavior should not be encouraged, a disguised compliment, and a silent conviction. From then on, Mara Walker became a living cautionary tale. A woman too emotional, unpredictable, unfit for strategic missions. No one mentioned that she had saved dozens of lives. No one asked how she knew about the old Mosul airstrip. No one considered that she was the only one in the unit who had spent weeks poring over military maps from the 1992nd, because sometimes the old things are the only ones left when the new ones fail. During a safety lecture for junior officers, someone asked, Major Walker, in a situation like Mosul, if it happened again, would you do anything differently? Mara looked directly at him, without a smile, without wavering. If there were a second time, I would still choose to save everyone, even if it meant I would never be allowed to fly a third. An uneasy silence blanketed the room, and no one asked further. Deep down, Mara never tried to clear her name, but every time she adjusted the cockpit harness, every time she studied a map as if it were a message from the past, she carried that truth as part of herself. Not as a burden, but as her core. She did not fly to avoid risk. She flew to bring others home, even if it meant she would never return to herself. Can you guess what will happen next? Take a moment to relax, leave a comment with the number 1 or I'm still here to keep listening. Back in the war room, the air seemed to thicken with tension and helplessness. 3-dimensional maps, weather charts, and GPS coordinates glowed on the giant screens like a death board, where every number was a verdict for anyone daring to touch it. The storm sweeping from the Sierra Range was closing in on SEAL Team Bravo, its speed and ferocity forcing even reconnaissance satellites to retreat. Unmanned drones had lost signal within minutes. Every ground route had been buried under snow. The team's position could only be reached from the air, yet the ground beneath them offered no runway worthy of the name. Only a crumbling strip of ice and rock, less than 300 meters long. The C-130 required at least 900 meters to land safely in ideal conditions. But now there were headwinds of force 9, thick ice and visibility near zero. That flight was not a mission, it was a sentence. The pilot would not only take the controls, they would be signing survival itself with blood, fighting gravity, time, and fate every second. Colonel Emerson read the numbers again, his voice flat, as if clinging to the last strand of reason. We need a pilot who can thread through canyons by feel, someone who can fly the aircraft beyond its safety limits and know exactly what they're doing. Every eye in the room turned toward a single point, or rather, struggled not to. Mara Walker still stood there, silent as part of the air itself. No one called her name. No one asked her to do it. They just waited, in silence for the thing no one dared to say aloud. Then, amid the hum of the air conditioner and the storm howling through the forecast feed, Mara stepped forward. Her boots struck the concrete in measured beats, not loud but echoing like war drums in the hearts of those who had once doubted her. She looked at no one. She stood before the screen, where the SEAL team's last coordinates glimmered in green digits, floating like lost stars in a violent sky. Her gaze locked on them as if she had lived there her entire life. No one told her what to do. She simply raised her hand, pressed the screen, and marked the coordinates with finality. Her faded pilot gloves, fabric frayed at the index finger once her second skin across 70 missions pointed straight at the impossible. She turned. Her voice was not loud, but it was sharp as a razor, slicing away the last fragments of hesitation. I will fly. 3 words. No flourish. No speech. Yet the room seemed to stop breathing. One pilot murmured from the back, voice dry. She's doing it again. Not mere surprise, but awe mixed with fear, watching someone walk straight into the place everyone else was trying to escape. Colonel Emerson slowly lifted his head from the dossier. For the first time in 12 years serving alongside Mara, he looked at her not as a superior officer, but as a man who had seen someone return from hell. They didn't need to speak. Both knew. Those who survived through solitary acts always carried a piece of nameless darkness with them. Mara, he said, for the first time calling her by name, not rank. Are you sure? This isn't an order. It's a choice. She met his eyes, her gaze lit by the cold blue-white LED glow. It was not recklessness, it was the light of conviction forged through fire. I don't fly to survive. I fly to bring others home. Silence. Then, like dominoes falling, heads lowered one by one, not out of shame, but because they knew none of them was ready as she was. None had the courage to fly where survival odds were less than 1 in 10, and still say I will go as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No one stopped her. Because they all knew some people are not born to remain behind. They are born to cross the storm, to become the last thread binding the 2 shores of life and death. 4:18 a.m. While most of America was still asleep, the hangar lights at Edwards roared to life. Beneath the white glare, the C-130 Hercules Desert Phantom 5 loomed like a silent beast, massive and heavy, coated in a sheen of cold mist. There were no greetings, no shouted slogans, as in a standard launch. There was only one rhythm, urgent, precise, and silent. Sergeant Frank Wheels Ramirez, the aircraft's crew chief, stood waiting for Mara with a clipboard and bloodshot eyes. I've checked it, he said quickly. Engine 2's got a slight vibration but within tolerance. Landing gear will have to be lowered manually on takeoff return. The electronics are freezing up. That's fine, Mara nodded. As long as it flies. Ramirez swallowed. Ma'am, you know the strip is less than 900 feet and it's not really a runway. Mara didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand on the fuselage on the old scarred patch of worn paint, a long scratch like a battle wound. From Mosul. She closed her eyes, hearing again the roar of engines from that day, smelling the acrid burn of scorched metal. The plane was not just a machine. It was a companion, a witness, the vessel where she had stored the last of her faith. We'll make it home, she whispered to it. 4:43 a.m. The rear ramp closed. Medical kits, ammunition, survival gear strapped tight in the bay. Every item was not just cargo, but hope, but life. The 3 other crew members fastened their harnesses without a word. They knew, if Mara was at the controls, then either they would return or they would become a story told forever. The control tower's voice crackled. Desert Phantom 5, you are cleared for takeoff. No speeches, no well wishes. Just an order, and a heart strong enough to beat through all of it. The C-130 roared, all four engines surging, the sound like a steel tsunami crashing across the mountains. The aircraft lifted off into the thick night, swallowed by the very darkness it was daring to defy. Out there, the weather was worse than forecast. Blizzard winds whitened the windshield, visibility shrank to less than 30 meters. Gusts slammed the airframe, shaking it like a tin can hurled into a flood. Warning lights blinked nonstop. Mara gripped the yoke, her body taut as wire, but her eyes never wavered. She flew as though the storm were inevitable, not an obstacle. There was no mapped flight path, only a chain of narrow passes, black canyons and sheer cliffs. The aircraft banked hard, threading itself through gaps like a needle through skin. Altitude, 300 feet. Too low for a transport, but just enough for someone who knew the ground was not the enemy, it was the destination. 30 minutes after takeoff, the radio hissed with a faint signal. Any station? Any station? This is Bravo 6. Request immediate evac. The voice was ragged, spattered with the drip of gunfire like metallic rain. Mara pressed the comms, her tone calm, steady. Bravo 6. This is Desert Phantom 5. I'm inbound. Extraction possible within 15 minutes. Hold tight. The reply came back. We have 3 critically wounded. Enemy closing on 3 sides. We don't have time. Mara turned to the crew chief, gave a slight nod. Prepare manual landing. Ramp drops the second we touch down. No margin. As the C-130 descended into the canyon where the SEALs held their line, the scene unfurled like the end of the world. Fire rising from wreckage, snow swirling with ash, tracers carving lethal streaks across the silver-gray sky. The landing zone was nothing but an ice-scoured clearing strewn with rocks, rubble, jagged frozen earth. No pilot had ever imagined putting wheels here, but Mara didn't imagine. She acted. The landing gear struck ground. A screech tore the night apart. The plane skidded, lurched, rattled violently, but it stopped, just 15 feet from the cliff's edge. The moment the wheels ceased spinning, the rear ramp dropped. The SEALs' armor coated in snow and dust hauled their wounded aboard. No shouts, no cries, just movement. Every second a life. 90 seconds later, all were strapped in. And Mara, wasting not one heartbeat, shoved the throttles forward. The aircraft thundered down the ice field, Taliban gunfire slashing like rain. The nose wheel smashed into a rock, jolting the frame. But Mara held course. She didn't need a runway, she only needed seconds. And a miracle. As the final edge rushed up, the C-130 heaved itself skyward, like a wounded beast refusing to die today. The last wheel left the ground, one heartbeat before the cliff dropped away beneath them. But it did not fall. It flew. And in the cargo bay, the SEALs exhaled not because they were safe, but because they had survived the impossible. One whispered, "She really is a ghost, flying through death itself." 6:21 a.m. As the sun crested over the Sierra peaks, pale gold light pierced through the heavy clouds and fell across the frost-cloaked fuselage of Desert Phantom 5, just touching down again at Edwards. The Hercules did not return in triumph. No drums, no brass bands greeted it. But along the taxiway, engineers, technicians, and duty pilots stood silently, one by one, without signal, without orders. They stood only to witness what they would later tell the next generation, that someone had done what they had only ever whispered was impossible. The aircraft rolled slowly into the hangar, its landing gear still streaked with dried blood and darkened snow. A shard of shrapnel jutted from the tail, not yet removed. The fuselage bore scars of gouges, dents, and scorched patches, testimony to an escape from hell. Inside, the SEAL team was silent, as though holding their breath, afraid it might all dissolve into dream. One of them, Sergeant First Class Ryan Grizz Dalton, shoulder wounded, stepped down quietly. When he saw Mara standing below, He halted. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Grizz raised his hand in salute, not the mechanical kind from the manual, but one carrying absolute respect. Mara returned it, and for the first time in 8 years her eyes blurred in the morning Sunday. As medics moved the wounded toward the field hospital, a doctor asked, "How did she land there?" A young SEAL, face still smeared with mud and snow, shook his head. "No one knows, and I don't think she needs us to." In the command office, Colonel Emerson stood at the window overlooking the taxiway. He did not smile. He did not speak. But when the public affairs officer asked whether a press conference should be held to honor this historic feat, Emerson simply replied, "Number, we don't need more medals. She needs trust, and she just earned it back." That same day, Air Force Command sent a special request to Mara Walker's office. Inside was an invitation to join a tactical pilot training program for those selected for missions that existed in no manual, no limits, no safety nets, only faith. Mara didn't open the letter immediately. She placed it beside something smaller, a worn navy blue patch, embroidered by hand with a golden trident. Grizz had given it to her before leaving, with only 3 words, "Yours now." The patch existed in no military record, but in the world of those who had stared at death, it was the highest invitation. "We accept you, as one of us." Since Mosul, no one had ever asked Mara how she felt. But that night, alone in her room, peeling off a flight suit still scented with fuel and snow, she looked into the mirror and saw a woman whose eyes no longer carried defense. Still the same eyes, but no longer wary. Now, at peace. She opened the old metal box and placed the trident patch beside the fragment of her first pilot's seat. No more relics, no more medals. Just small symbols from those who once doubted her, but who today had let her fly them back from the dark. The next day, a young officer from the tactical pilot unit approached, asking permission to study the unofficial Mosul maps with her. He said simply, "I think, if one day I have to fly like you, then at least I should know where to start." Mara smiled faintly. A real smile. "Don't start with the maps," she said. "Start with never leaving the cockpit while someone still has hope." A week later, the skies over Edwards were unusually clear. No howling wind, no ice, no snow, as if nature itself knew it was time to fall silent. Inside Hangar 4, Desert Phantom 5 was still under repair after its fateful flight. Bullet holes had been welded shut, new landing gear installed, the silver-gray paint not yet covering the burn marks. But there was one small detail no one had touched. A hand-sewn patch, fastened inside the cockpit, just behind Mara's seat. It was the trident patch, the SEAL insignia stitched there not as a message for others, but for herself. Not a trophy, not the restoration of reputation, but forgiveness for herself. That morning, as Mara entered the hangar, she carried something no one had seen her wear for 3 years. An old insignia, wings and flame, the emblem of a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, first given to her after her inaugural flight at Luke Air Force Base, Arizona. She fastened it once more to her flight suit, just beneath the new patch from the SEALs. An older technician, nearly 30 years in service, nodded silently. "Welcome back, Major." No further explanation needed. That afternoon, in the command room, Colonel Emerson held a private meeting. No press, no media, just a simple room, the entire squadron present. On the table lay a faded American flag once flown at a forward post in Helmand, once witnessing countless departures and returns. Now it was folded neatly, resting in Emerson's hands as he stepped before Mara. "No medal can capture what you've done," he said. "But there is something that lasts longer than any citation. Memory. The trust you've stitched back, thread by thread, into our very hearts." He handed her the flag. The entire room stood at attention, No applause, but the way they looked at her, silent, proud, was enough to tell her she was no longer a ghost. She was the one who led them out of the dark. And somewhere in the frozen Sierra valleys, where the blizzard had erased much of that night's traces, there still remained the imprint of a C-130's wheels stretching less than 300 meters, yet long enough for 12 men to survive, and long enough for one woman, once called Wraith, to step out of her own past. Not through fame, but through an act no one needed to know, yet everyone would remember. There are heroes who need no stage, no applause, only a cockpit, a decision, and an unshakable faith. The story of Major Mara Walker reminds us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it comes from a forgotten woman who dared to walk into darkness so others could return to the light. In a world of doubt, there are moments like these reminding us that honor is not something you're given, but something you live for. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment, share your thoughts, your memories, or simply a thank you to those still serving in silence. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so that more people can be inspired by things that seemed forgotten but will never fade. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes a miracle takes the shape of an old aircraft, flown by the one you once forgot.